Professor Dr. Luís Guerra is a professor of English language and linguistics/applied linguistics at the Department of Linguistics and Literatures, director of the Language Center of the School of Social Sciences at the University of Évora, Portugal, and researcher at the University of Lisbon Center for English Studies. His research interests are ELF/AO, World Englishes, ELF-based teaching methodology, and the development of intercultural communicative competence. If you're interested, you can read his biodata in our booklet. The title of his talk is Revisiting English Language Teaching Through the ELF and ICC Paradigms. Welcome again, dear Dr. Luís Guerra, and the screen is all yours. By the way, please keep an eye on my video. I will raise my hand when you have 10 minutes left, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. The screen is yours.
Thank you. All right. I think I'm sharing it. I was able to. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. And of course, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to take part in this event. It's for me, it's always a pleasure to meet my Turkish colleagues, especially those from Gazi University, Boğaziçi University, and Cumhuriyet University, just to name a few of those I have worked and still work with. So, as the title of my presentation briefly introduces, the main idea of the talk stems from some of the issues that I believe today affect the English language teaching debate. Among the several issues possible of discussion, I will pick just three, which I believe are those which better describe the forms and functions of English nowadays. So the first one would be the increasing numbers of non-native speakers who use English as an international language. Another issue central to the debate would be the number of varieties of Englishes, of world Englishes. And the last one would be the use of English nowadays for intercultural communication. But as I said, this talk will focus on one specific concept, which is that of English as a lingua franca for international communication. And I believe this quote from Gradall sums up the idea that the concept of English as a lingua franca brings to the debate when he says that English is no longer English as we have known it and have taught it in the past as a foreign language, but a new phenomenon now recognized as English as a lingua franca. I put English as a lingua franca in bold, and maybe I should have also highlighted the idea of English as a foreign language, because later on, I'm going to put these two concepts side by side so we can see how different these two approaches are. So, it's always relevant to talk about definitions of concepts when we come across new ideas or new perspectives. So I'm going to briefly show you 4 different definitions of English as a lingua franca provided over the past 20 years so that they will help us identify how the perspective, how the perception of ELF has evolved throughout time. So the first one I'm going to show you is one provided by Firth in 1996. And Firth suggested that ELF is a contact language between persons who share neither a common native language nor a common national culture. it's interesting to put language and culture side by side in this definition. And he continues, and for whom English is the chosen foreign language of communication. So that was basically the first attempts of defining and providing the idea of what English as a lingua franca would be. Later on, a couple of years later, House provided the following definition, focusing on ELF interactions themselves. ELF interactions are defined as interactions between members of two or more different lingua cultures. Again, language and culture hand in hand. In English, for none of whom English is the mother tongue. Now, as time went by, as the perspective of ELF became evolved or became more mature due to the different studies and perceptions, Jenkins provided the following definition. English as a lingua franca refers, in a nutshell, to the world's most extensive contemporary use of English. In essence, English, when it is used as a contact language between people from different first languages, and there you are, including native English speakers. So for the first time, or at that time, it became relevant to include native speakers of English in these ELF interactions, even though the idea of contact language was still there in that definition, because this is the whole, what is behind a lingua franca, regardless of which language we're talking about, right? But I would end these definitions of ELF with a more recent one provided by Moranen in 2018, in which it's a long one because she incorporates some interesting concepts as well when she says that the significance of ELF transcends the content of any particular individual or group with English. ELF is not just a contact language in the sense that she is breaking that idea from the previous definitions as a mere contact language, where English is a domestic language or otherwise especially salient in a given community, but a non-local lingua franca. So there's no specific place for ELF interactions to happen. The means of communications, and she continues, it's the means of communicating between people from anywhere in the world. So there's no more relevance of any national affiliation. So neither is its global weight restricted to elite usages in politics, international business, or academia, but it is also employed by tourists, migrant workers, asylum seekers, and just anyone in their daily lives over digital media. In other words, it's like saying ELF interactions occur anywhere with anybody, right? Regardless of the place, regardless of the first languages, regardless of the cultures of the speakers. So, and because the culture of the speakers is a relevant issue in understanding the concept of ELF, it is important to relate these two perspectives. The perspective of developing intercultural competence among speakers, at the same time understanding that this communication occurs in ELF interactions. So basically, if we put these two concepts side by side, the goal would be to increase learners' awareness and respect for other Englishes or other cultures, preparing them for real life encounters. So when you put intercultural communicative competence together with ELF, this is what the goal should be. The goal for teaching, for learning, and for using itself, right? So because it is central to understand ELF, To also understand intercultural communicative competence, I'm going then now to briefly then show you some definitions, some perspectives, some interpretations of what intercultural competence means. So because this is what we're supposed to do as teachers in the classroom. So Nutzman in 1990, by the way, I'm going to be showing several definitions, several quotes from 90s, early 21st century. And I did that on purpose just to show you how those concepts have been going on for some time, and still it's necessary for us to continue talking about them because they haven't been fully incorporated in our classroom. So for Nutzman in 1999, he said that intercultural competence is the awareness of the culture's specific dependency of thought and behavior. He also said that it is the rejection of ethnocentrism, because one's own system of cultural norms should not be considered appropriate to be applied to the evaluation of other cultures. And he added that it has some relevance of interpersonal sensitivity, which is the ability to understand a person in his own right. And knowledge. So I highlighted knowledge because we're going to see that later. Knowledge of general parameters according to which cultures can be distinguished. For instance, issues related to religion, the roles of sexes, to celebration. So the culture as we usually approach in a more traditional language classroom. But not only knowledge of parameters, but cognitive flexibility, to be open to new ideas and beliefs, and finally, changing your behavior as well. It requires some behavioral flexibility, which is the ability to change your behavior patterns, right? To be open to the other. Now, developing on that, more recently, Byron proposed what it means to be intercultural. And he identified the three main areas of development: the affective area, the cognitive area, and the behavioral area, which is not much different from what Nutzman had done before. Remember that I highlighted those words: knowledge, cognitive, and behavior, because it all has to do with changing these three areas of attitudes, right? Attitudes, curiosity and openness, readiness to suspend disbelief about other cultures and belief about one's own, knowledge of social groups and their products and practices in one's own and in one's interlocutor's country, and of the general process of societal and individual interaction. And he goes on by adding other issues: skills of interpreting and relating, skills of discovery and interaction, critical cultural awareness, and political education. So, this is to say that these issues are supposed to be present also in our language classroom, because that is how we take responsibility for that development of intercultural communicative competence. It's more, in this case, it's more of the intercultural, and the communicative aspect would be developed through this ELF perspective. And more recently, because I think it's important also to see how other researchers have been dealing with the idea of developing intercultural competence, Baker has proposed, among other aspects, he proposed a levels of practice-orientated intercultural awareness. For him, we're supposed to develop 3 levels, right? To go from level 1 to level 3. Level 1 would be the basic cultural awareness, our ability to articulate our own cultural perspective and compare cultures at a general level. But that's just the beginning of the development of intercultural competence, because we have to move on to level 2. Level 2 would be the advanced cultural awareness, the ability to go beyond cultural generalizations and stereotypes and to compare and mediate between cultures at a specific level. Still, there is a further level that we should aim at achieving, which is the pure level of intercultural awareness, is our capacity to negotiate and mediate between different culturally grounded communication modes based on the above understanding of culture and intercultural communication. So even though I introduce you to 3 different perspectives, 3 different ways of organizing the issues involved in developing intercultural communicative competence, I think it's clear that regardless of when they were proposed, the development of our ability to understand and accept other cultures is central to the debate of English language teaching in the 21st century, right? And a while ago, I said that I should have highlighted that first definition of ELF that referred to teaching English as a foreign language, because the proposals of an ELF perspective, an ELF paradigm, we always use this comparison. What does it mean to teach or to be in the classroom under an ELF aware activities and materials and procedures, as opposed to what is the traditional approach to teaching, which we, in this case, identify as EFL, English as a Foreign Language Perspective. So again, according to Nutzman, he briefly put side by side some issues regarding EFL, the traditional approach, and some issues similar perspectives, similar perceptions of those issues under an ELF umbrella. So the EFL perspective would basically say that teachers are supposed to prepare learners to communicate with native speakers of English in English-speaking countries. So this EFL comes in the tradition of foreign language teaching that can be applied to teaching Turkish as a foreign language, teaching Portuguese as a foreign language, teaching Spanish as a foreign language, Italian as a foreign language, Russian, right? So this is the foreign language approach. He also said that EFL is based on the linguistic and social cultural norms of native speakers of English and their respective cultures. I remember a while ago when Dorota was talking about the German teachers, right? Their perception of teaching. It had to do with, the native speakerism, the language, the quality of the standard, right? Teaching the standard variety of the language. So this is the foreign language perception. And also, he said that in EFL, communication is based exactly on standard English In our case, English, British or American English, due to the influences of both countries and languages varieties. The better learners handle the grammatical rules and lexes of the standard language, British or American, the more successful they tend to be in their communication with native speakers, right? Now, the similar approach under an ELF perspective would be the following. The ELF classroom prepares learners to communicate with non-native speakers of English from around the world, because the EFL already prepares for native speakers. So the EFL will will enlarge the scope of preparing learners to communicate with a greater variety of speakers, non-native speakers, for instance. In terms of culture, ELF is neutral with regard to the different cultural backgrounds of the interlocutors. The interlocutors negotiate and establish some kind of common intercultural basis. Then we have to go back to the themes, the topics of the intercultural competence that I showed you a while ago. Summing up, communication for ELF in an ELF perspective is not based on any particular national linguistic standard of English. Native speaker norms or near native speaker norms cannot guarantee that the communication will be successful. Now, this I'm touching on a very sensitive issue. This doesn't mean that native speaker norms should be cast aside, right? It's not that. We have to teach something, right? We have to teach something, and we teach from norms, from native speakers. But the thing is, and that's the end, that is not everything that needs to be done. This is not the solution for every issue that our learners / users will come across when they leave the classroom and they engage in communication with other users of English. So there is more to it than just focusing on native speaker norms, all right? So based on that, I propose a very brief paradigm of ELF in English language teaching. And I will just highlight 4 issues. There are many other issues that should be considered when teaching the language, when teaching English, but I'm just going to highlight 4 of them. First one has to do with language ownership. Second one with learners' goals. The third one with native and non-native varieties and cultures. And the last one, materials. So the first one, that's the one. The first one would be ownership of English. And I bring an old quote from Henry Whittleson, provided 1994, in which he said that English, already at that time, serves a whole range of different communities and their institutional purposes. And these transcend traditional, communal, and cultural boundaries. And we're used to communal and cultural boundaries in our classes when we usually identify those communities and cultures as the native speakers. And most of the times, British and American, right? We don't go much beyond other native speakers, right? So, and those boundaries, according to Whittleson, they're non-exist. They don't exist when it comes to the real use of English, right? So, in other words, what he's saying is that English is the means of expression of the speaker's culture, regardless of our national affiliation. It's not an imitation of the culture of Great Britain or the US or any other native speaking English speaking country. Um, we maybe we have influences, right? So maybe you can notice a more American accent that I have for having learned, for having lived in the United States. But that came naturally. I never, or we should never aim at imitating, right, the native speaker, right? Because then I would be touching upon another issue, which is that of identity, that also Dorota mentioned a while ago in a different point of view. But there is also the identity building of the kind of English that we speak, the kind of English that belongs to us, that is the consequence of our history, of our, as Dorota, our learning trajectory, right? So another issue would be then the learner's goal, which has to be taken into account, especially by considering that these goals go beyond the classroom. So using English and learning English only in the classroom is a misconception that most teachers should somehow get rid of, right? The amount of time that nowadays our students spend in using or even learning English outside the school, sometimes it's even longer than the 50 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a week that we spend with them. So Learners Go should incorporate in and out of the classroom use of the language. And again, I bring Cook's quote at the turn of the century, in which we see that the explanation provided is that together with the change in attitude, placing more emphasis on the successful second language user and on using the first language more in teaching can bring language teaching to the realization that it is helping people use second languages, not imitate language speakers. So at that time already, there was a hint or a suggestion of using other learners in the classroom as models as well, not just native speakers. Going back to Nutzman, because at that time he wrote a lot about, he studied, researched a lot about English as an international language, as a global language. Nutzman said that expecting learners to comply with a set of linguistic norms would probably put unnecessary pressure on them, since they would hardly be able to fully live up to such expectations. That doesn't mean that we have successful, I mean, we know we have successful learners, we have successful students who somehow have this ability to develop language competence, but it's not the reality. The reality in the classroom is that several learners fall short of what we expect them to achieve. And it is the pressure to become and to use language just like the native speaker uses that Nutzman believes it is unnecessary. Because, as Zeidelhofer says later on, despite their limitations, I mean, the learner's limitations, from a conventional standpoint, I mean, not achieving a native or near native competence, she says that these failed learners can be or become effective users. So it's acknowledging that these failed learners, from a traditional perspective, are not failed at all. They just communicate using different techniques, different ways of achieving that communication, which not necessarily comply with the norms of the native speaker. So, and the third one, all related to that, in order to build this paradigm of ELF in ELT, would be then the place of native and non-native varieties and cultures. And I'm going to show you again a list of 5 items proposed by Cook when it comes to dealing with varieties and cultures. First of all, Cook says that teachers should present students with examples of the language of L2 users and of the language addressed to L2 users rather than native speaker varieties. Again, let me just highlight that it's not let's remove that and replace by something else. It's besides what we usually do, let's incorporate L2 users' language as well. Cook also says that teaching should reflect the language L2 users employ with other L2 users. In other words, in our case here, non-native speakers' interactions and the modifications first language those native users make in their speech to L2 users. So what Cook is saying that native speakers are also responsible in those ELF interactions. When the native speaker engages in communication with other non-native speakers, it's not the non-native speaker's responsibility to meet the parameters or the mode of communication of the native speaker. The native speaker also has to use some communicative skills to adapt his language to the ability of the non-native speaker. So it's a true interaction. It's a true exchange of communicative goals. And third one, teachers should present situations and materials in which L2 users take part. So more or less, it's basically going around the same idea of incorporating L2 users and also see first language L2, L1 as a positive factor in the classroom and use it to present meaning, to communicate during classroom activities or in activities that involve both languages. And finally, I think this last one would be the one that incorporates the whole thing. Use descriptions of L2 users rather than descriptions of native speakers as a source of information, right? The fifth one, sort of encompasses the previous one. And materials. Materials, I will briefly just refer to it by giving this quote from Zeidelhofer, in which it says that she warns us or reminds us that most practical matters which impinge directly on teachers' daily practice, such as textbooks, reference works, supplementary materials, examinations and qualifications, still make almost exclusive reference to notions of the native speaker culture as the uncontaminated source providing the language to be taught. This was suggested in 1999, but to be honest, I wouldn't change that much in that quotation if we considered what's going on nowadays in ELT. There's still a lot of emphasis put on the what believed uncontaminated native speaker language and culture. It has changed a little bit. Depending on the textbooks that we use, we might find speakers, non-native speakers, references to other native countries, references to non-native countries. So it has become more international. It has become more intercultural. But still, what happens is that uh, we have to be careful when it comes to these four issues. When you want to suggest or try and incorporate an ELT perspective in ELT when it comes to basic and secondary education materials and activities, in teacher training programs, materials writers, and policies for basic and secondary schools. Because we would have to tackle all these aspects, these areas of English language teaching, if we really wanted to make a difference and start incorporating a different approach to ELT. And for this section, I would just briefly finish with this quote by Kirkpatrick, kind of recent, in which he says, and for me, it sums it up, in aiming to teach and learn English in ways that would allow for effective communication across linguistic and cultural boundaries, the focus of the classroom moves from the acquisition of the norms associated with a standard model to a focus on learning linguistic features, cultural information, and communication strategies that will facilitate communication. So it is widening, as I said a while ago, widening the scope, widening the attitude, enlarging the content of the language classroom. And as I said, materials are not ready, totally ready for that. And what happens is that teachers need usually to build or adapt materials if they want to provide an ELF perspective. So I'm going to, again, briefly, over the next 10 minutes, I think I have more or less 10 minutes, right?
No, I have already warned you. You don't have any time left because we kind of squeezed in the break time. So
Oh,
you
I'm
need to,
sorry.
you need to finish it in 1 minute. Or
Oh, I'm
let me
sorry.
be generous. I will give you 1 more minute. How
Oh,
about
no, no,
2 minutes?
no, no. Okay, finish it. I thought it was going until 2:30. I'm so sorry. I thought I was going.
I skipped the break part. That's my fault. I'm
Okay.
sorry. That's my bad.
Oh,
But I'm going to make it up. I
okay.
will,
I will. Sorry.
clear
I
that time
will
for
just
question
go over
answer.
that. I will just go over that.
Uh,
So,
yeah, I mean, it's going well, but I know people are tired. So if you can
sure,
just
sure,
wrap
sure,
it
sure.
up, I
I'm,
would
I'm
definitely
sorry.
appreciate it.
I
Thank
apologize
you.
for that. My
No,
concept
no,
at
that's
the
okay.
time was a little bit different. So I just want to show very quickly the what you can do in terms of building adapting when there are many audio-visual references that you can use, songs, examples of non-native speakers, films, TV. There is also online archives that you can find. You Google it, you find international dialects of English, speech accent archives, non-native interactions. There's web apps, 2.0 apps, Voki, Mad Max, Project Writer, VoiceThread, Skype, Zoom that allow for incorporating this in the language classroom. And finally, digital media. You have magazines and news channels, newspapers from around the world, from Africa, Arabic countries, Japan, India. I was going to just show some YouTube and some examples. I'm so sorry. I really did not follow the news schedule. Yeah, but basically, yeah, that's it. I just wanted to finish with this. It's a matter of attitudes. When we change our attitudes, we change our approach as well in the classroom.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I could listen to you for at least 1 more hour. I have no objections to that. And the topic is, of course, very interesting. But I mean, we have been very busy
Sure.
since 9 o'clock this morning.
Sure,
So,
sure.
Sedat Hocam,
I'm going to interrupt my, yeah.
Yes.
Because I have a part which in fact was put there just for question and answers. But there is one question that someone wants to ask of Dorota. And Dr. Guerra, can I ask you something? Well, it's not a question,
Sure.
but I would like to learn your personal opinion on this. Now, I keep reading research related to the, well, finding that unless you speak standard English, it becomes very hard to tolerate non-standard English. That's why people say non-native speakers have more difficult time understanding non-native speakers. I personally experienced that. I was in London and I had to communicate with someone not originally English. I don't want to mention the original country, but oh my God, it was the worst experience I have ever had. And then I asked a British gentleman to translate that for me.
Sure.
So the native speaker acted as the translator between two non-native speakers. So what is your personal opinion?
I couldn't agree more, but the explanation I have is that we are more trained to understand native speaker English because that's what we have. I'm speaking on behalf of learners, learners of English as a second language, right? We're trained to listening and recognizing the intricacies of British English, American English, standard, and we're talking about standard because I had a similar experience when I landed in Edinburgh, and I spoke to a man, and I asked him where the subway station was, and he probably told me where it was, but I didn't understand it because he was possibly that stereotype of the Scottish heavy accent English. So if I were to compare that Scottish man with any of my Turkish colleagues and the students I have here, I can understand them much better than that Scottish man because I'm not used to it, because I cannot recognize the sounds of that variety. And what an ELF perspective does is, why don't we expose our students, our learners, to those non-native accents as well?
But how many accents can you expose your students to?
Exactly.
It's impossible. I guess that's why we keep the shortcut. We try to teach the standard so that they can tolerate the non-standard. But I do understand your point, and I do respect that point of view. But when it comes to practicality, isn't it impossible?
Of course, we're not going to cover the whole range of non-native accents that our learners would need because we don't know what they need. What's going to happen in 5 years? That our learner may work in Japan and they might have difficulties in it. So we can't foresee the. So what we can do is open their mind towards acknowledging that the non-native speaker is a speaker on his and her own right. And that if you don't understand that at first, it's because you are unfamiliar with that. It's not because that his accent is faulty or wrong. No, his accent is different from the ones you're used. But of course, we can't do everything in the classroom. But
it's an excellent point, though. I mean, being respectful, definitely.
Because there's a tendency to say, no, bad English. I don't like it. So they don't speak English well. So there's this judgment that needs to be, cast away. We are not judged because the way we judge others, we are being judged as well. So we don't want
Oh
that.
my God, you should see our context. We, oh my God, destructively criticize each other.
Yeah.
That's why Turkish people are so afraid to speak in English.
Exactly, because
Believe me, I mean, it's very much like, oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake and people are going to laugh at me. I don't want to make a clown of myself, you know? So I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah.
We do this in our culture to each other.
We do. We need
Yeah.
to empower our learners and have them aware of what's going on.
Yeah. There is another question. Turan Paker Hocam raises this question. He says, do you expect any attitude change in high-stake exams?
I'm usually an optimistic person, and I think there will be changes. There has been changes. There are some exams, IELTS, some FCE, some CPE, that the listening part already includes some non-native speaker, non-native speaker with heavy accent that people would not understand. But non-British, non-American. So this, and as I said, some textbooks are changing. I want to believe so. I want to believe that this is a path. I don't know how long this path is. Maybe I don't see the end, but I see changes. I see change because if you look at what we are, where we are now, and 30, 40 years ago, it changed a lot, right? Our perception of what learning English is different. So I'm optimistic. I think it will get there. It will get somehow. I don't know how exactly, specifically, but it will change.
Yeah. By the way, Sedat Hocam, it keeps saying that my internet connection is unstable. So if you lose me, you take over, please. Okay. You never know. There's another question here. Zehra Sultan Hocam asks, does the exposure to non-standard English cause fossilization regarding pronunciation?
Right. That's a very interesting. Yes, very interesting because in my research as well, I have come across teachers who are fearful of exposing students to non-standard accent or non-standard English. As I said, we will keep on teaching the standard English. We will keep on teaching that kind of English, which is common to all speakers of English, which allow for communication. We wouldn't be understanding each other if we didn't use that kind of language we are using, and if I didn't have a heavy accent or anybody here, you here, right? But there has to be some clear distinction between productive skills and receptive skills. So when you want to develop your oral productive skills of your learners, you want your learners to speak intelligible English.
Yes.
Another key word, intelligibility. You may have an accent, but still be intelligible. That Scottish man I met was not intelligible to me. So we want our learners to be intelligible, producing language. But we want also our learners to be receptively competent listeners. So the exposure of these varieties should not be aimed at changing the way they produce the language, but changing the way they listen to the features of those other accents.
Yeah, I think you have already mentioned this in your talk. I remember saying that we're not going to throw the standard away.
No,
yes,
never.
The standard is going to be there, but it is more like the attitude, as you have said, the tolerance to non-native speech.
Exactly. It's the standard that allows us to be here. It allows them to ask me questions because I think I used standard English that most everybody could understand, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're writing standard English, so
Yeah.
never-
Well, I think we can discuss this for hours, and it's not going to end because there's so much to talk about. But there is one question that I need to, because I promised my colleague, my dear colleague Ben Pekar, this question is for Dorota. Are you here with us, Dorota? Wow, look
Nope.
at me. I'm sounding like I'm talking to a ghost.
No.
I'm so sorry.
If you are here-
Bena Hocam, don't kill me, please. I mean, she left. Most probably she had something else in her schedule. If you want, you can ask a question of Dr. Guerra. How about that? Bena Hocam, please don't. She's threatening me. Look at the chat box. My dear colleague, you see what kind of conditions we are working under? Yeah.
yeah.
We are under great pressure. Well, I don't know how to thank you because I think you have opened several different windows, several different doors for all of us to think, to, I don't know, reconsider, to reflect on. So I hope we can have you again sometime soon as our speaker.
My pleasure.
And we can discuss these in more detailed form.
My pleasure.
Thank you again.
But
Thank you.
Next time I want to be there. I want to go to Turkey because I miss being in Turkey.
Well, the next conference is going to be in 2023, and hopefully it will be face to face.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, my dear colleagues, thank you very much for your participation. Without you, it would be impossible to have this excellent, wonderful session. And this is the last session of the day. Rest well, have fun. Tomorrow, we're going to start early in the morning. Thanks again. Thank you, everyone. Take good care of yourselves. Hope to see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.